Welcome to the webinar, 4 tips for scaling your e-commerce growth with a marketplace in 2022. My name is Jeff Gamet and I'll be your moderator today. But before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets. You can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. Now, please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. And to enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. And we encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget. And we will try to answer these questions during the webinar, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. And please note, we do capture all the questions.
So let's get started. If I'd make some introductions, I'm going to welcome two experts. But firstly, my name is Richard Hankin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketplacer for North America. Marketplace is a global technology platform that enables brands, retailers and suppliers, communities and innovators to easily build and grow successful online marketplaces at scale. So I'm really pleased to be here today. And I'm joined today by Justin Hilberg, founder and CEO of the Shared CEO and former Managing Director, Shared Services with the Alchemy Group. In that role, Justin worked with Marketplacer to develop the marketplace strategy for the Surf Stitch brand. Among other things, he's dedicated his time to helping retail brands scale profitability. I'm also pleased to welcome Mr. Marketplace himself, Tom McFadden, President and Chief Executive Officer of McFadden Digital, and author of Marketplace Best Practices, Transforming Commerce in the Platform Economy. Tom's been building marketplaces for 15 years, and we're thrilled to have both Tom and Justin here today. Look, the last few years have been transformational for e-commerce, both locally and globally. With exponential growth in 2020 giving way to a more sustained growth in 2021, currently every dollar of every $5 in retail is spent through digital orders at the moment. E-commerce retailers are looking for ways to scale their growth, all the while protecting profits from rising inflation and increasing costs in supply chain. So really happy to have Tom and Justin here today to speak about the role that a marketplace can play for retailers looking to scale their e-commerce footprint whilst developing their brand and community. So perhaps to start with, let's set the level for a moment and discuss what is a marketplace. I think we're all familiar with the term, and Amazon and eBay have got a lot to do with that, but it's not necessarily that's the best model to keep in mind if you're a retailer. So perhaps as a start point, Tom, I'd love if you can give us a quick rundown of what we mean when we say the word marketplace.
Certainly, Richard. Thanks for having me on the webinar today. So marketplaces, everybody knew Amazon, eBay, and eventually Walmart became great enterprise scale marketplaces. Even some of the Alibaba and Mercado Libre in Asia and Latin America, respectively. But a lot of literally hundreds, close to 1,000 retailers and B2B organizations operate marketplaces. So they become much more prevalent in today's digital world. And it's a platform that's technology and a business platform. So both aspects of the organization change that really enable you to scale your sales, your SKU count, your seller count, your transaction volume, your SEO, your data, many different aspects we'll talk about today. And it really helps drive the top line value, and it also lowers the bottom side of the ROI equation by reducing costs in a lot of aspects that we'll talk about later.
And maybe Justin, before I jump over to jump back to Tom, it'd be sort of interesting to understand from your perspective what you think about when we say the term marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess holistically, it's a way of collecting a variety of products from a variety of sources that could be placed in a variety of warehouses and collecting it all in one platform to make it really easy for shoppers to browse and buy a curated assortment. So that's kind of the real high level view that I always pitch it as. But it's also a strategic growth pillar for a lot of established retailers. So it's a good capital light avenue to rapidly explore new categories, to extend existing categories, introduce new brands, and really help improve the return on investment of your owned inventory. So that's your kind of tied up cash sitting in inventory. You can really dedicate that to your most productive sources of inventory while putting your slightly more risky, adventurous inventory options into a marketplace model. And that really helps de-risk your whole business plan. So yeah, marketplaces can be a real good avenue for capital light growth initiatives, and exploring some of those kind of new categories and introducing those to your customers.
Yeah, great. It's interesting to hear you guys summarize it that way. So kind of what I hear, or what I sort of believe, is that it's a growth strategy that we're talking about here, whilst maintaining the ownership of the customer and the experience. Obviously, historically, we talk about marketplaces as a third-party channel. This is an opportunity to grow that customer base, whilst ideally integrated to your existing e-commerce experience. Maybe Tom, I'll sort of throw back to you. I know you've obviously been in the industry a long time and done a lot of work in this space, and have perhaps a way to kind of describe, or better describe, kind of the transformation from a e-commerce traditional business into more of a platform business.
Great point. So let's talk about what a platform is, and maybe we'll start by defining what a platform is not. So we'll compare pipeline versus platform. So platform can mean a lot of things. Microsoft Windows is a platform. Lots of different things can be considered a platform. But in the terms of a marketplace, it's really an economic model, a financial model, a business model that we want to understand. And there's some clear definitions of what a platform business is. But again, let's start with the opposite of that, what a pipeline business is. And pipeline describes traditional retail that's been around for millennia, and e-commerce as well that's been around for a quarter century or so. So it's a pipeline, meaning that it's a sequential series of events that have to happen one after the other in this linear fashion. And it's also very labor intensive. So let's take a look at this from left to right. The first step of the chevron arrows at the top, you have to source your goods. You have to find products from distributors or manufacturers, and then negotiate the contracts for those vendors. And this process, sometimes we've seen in B2B companies, that can take a month or more. The next step is loading those products into an ERP, typically a fairly short, cryptic description of the products. Then the next step is having merchandisers create the more attractive narrative text that's SEO optimized. That's what's going to really sell the product to your customer, as opposed to a cryptic 40-character ERP code for describing a product. So that's a labor-intensive activity. A lot of e-commerce and companies hire many merchandisers to work on their catalog. You set the price, and this sounds trivial, but it's actually an important aspect in comparing a retail or e-commerce business against a marketplace. We'll talk about that in the opposite in the marketplace business model. You have to hold the inventory, both physically and financially. So physically, meaning you have to build out distribution centers, fulfillment centers, or small businesses in a garage. Somebody has to hold that inventory physically, have the space for it, which is capital intensive. But even more capital intensive is actually purchasing the goods. So you have to have the outlay of cash to buy merchandise to fulfill to your customers. Processing the orders, this is typically automated. The processing the credit card and updating the order management system and so forth. And the last step, fulfilling orders, which can be very labor intensive as well. And that requires the warehouse workers. Again, each one of these steps in the process, you have to essentially double your head count if you want to double your SKU count. So if you want to find twice as many products, you have to hire twice as many people to do that, twice as many people negotiate contracts, twice as many people load it in, twice as many merchandisers, et cetera, twice as many warehouse workers to finally get to the end customer where you get the dollars. On the next slide, we're going to talk about a platform business. So here, let's look at this. Actually, we're going to go from right to left on this diagram. So you have the same customers, but they're connected into this network ecosystem, which I'll talk about how that's exponential instead of a linear network. Underneath that, you have just a couple of labor categories or types of employees you have to hire. You have to recruit sellers. So this is going out, and much like you find customers, you have to find sellers for your marketplace. And you have to support the sellers and then processing orders. Again, that's typically automated. So it's really just those two core categories that you need. Your marketplace platform has standard terms and conditions, meaning sellers must fulfill goods in a certain amount of time. They must respond to customer queries in a certain amount of time. They shall not contact customers directly. They shall merchandise their products. All the requirements, and then also liability for or responsibilities of the marketplace operator. You're going to pay the sellers within 7 or 30 days from the order placement. You're going to withhold this much commission based on this category of goods. Standard terms and conditions that apply to dozens, hundreds, thousands of sellers instead of negotiating contracts with each independent seller. And then on the left, we see at the top, we see a third-party reseller who has a relationship with one distributor. So they go through that pipeline of activities of sourcing the goods, negotiating contracts for those goods, loading them into their system of record, merchandising those goods, writing the descriptive text for them, holding the goods, fulfilling the goods to the end customer. That linear sequential set of activities is outsourced to that third-party seller from the distributor. On the second third-party reseller we see, they're connected to two distributors. So they can be sourcing goods from multiple locations. The third-party seller here is pulling goods from multiple distributors, including a distributor that another 3P seller is sourcing from. So these two third-party sellers are competing against each other. In other words, they're going to drive the price down for the customer. Next down on the seller list, we see distributors purchasing goods from a manufacturer. And at the very bottom, we see actually the manufacturers adding and selling directly onto the marketplace. And what happens here, that the exponential growth of that network ecosystem, which is part of the flywheel, is you don't have a one-to-one relationship. It's many customers on the right and many sellers operating in parallel on the left. You don't have that linear sequential activity where you as a marketplace operator, you need to hire twice as many merchandisers to have twice as many items in your catalog. You don't need to hire twice as many warehouse workers to fulfill twice as many goods to your customers. And this makes it an exponential growth, a lower cost of scaling, more data coming in, more products in your system, more transactions going to the customer, lower costs to the customer for the goods. Again, driving that flywheel we've probably all heard about from the Amazon virtuous cycle. Hand it back to you, Richard.
No, it's really helpful, Tom, I think, to sort of describe the differences between the fundamental difference between the two business model. One of the things that jumps out at me, if I'm a retailer and looking at this as an opportunity, is the speed and flexibility that it requires. So obviously you don't have to own the product to go into a new category, but the speed of which you can react to trends and pivot and respond to the market by adding a third-party seller and putting that product on your website live versus having to go through that traditional, fairly long, laborious process of merchandising and purchasing and warehousing product. I see that as a real strategic advantage for retailers out there.
Absolutely. I'll just add there the nimbleness that typically we see that pipeline in many businesses being a 1 to 2 month time frame. Here in a marketplace, especially with all the connectors to third-party sellers that marketplacer has, you can onboard sellers in a matter of days or weeks, getting new products, new sellers to the customer within days.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because a lot of brands out there still work on the old indent model where you're having to place orders 6 to 9 months out in advance. So this is a significantly faster route to market.
Absolutely. So, I mean, clearly we believe there's a lot of potential with this model, the marketplace model. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening or wondering, why now? Why as we transition away from, I suppose what you call the pandemic economy, why do we believe now is the right time for brands to consider a marketplace strategy? Perhaps, Justin, I'll throw to you to talk a little bit the sort of trends that you're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's definitely uncertain times. We've got global pressures for a whole number of reasons. It's a good time because consumers have sort of been thrust more heavily into the digital retail sphere. And they're becoming a lot more comfortable with it. So a lot of digital retailers have seen solid growth through the global lockdowns over the past 2 years. But with that has come some growing pains. And with the uncertainty of the future, with global inflation and sort of tightening of markets, businesses are going to need to find real economical ways and responsible ways to access that next level of growth. And as we spoke about earlier, being super efficient with your growth is going to be very important, and it's also going to be rewarded by investors. So those capital light business models that aren't investing in heavy amounts of inventory kind of 9 months in advance, like we just spoke about, and then having to store that stock in multiple warehouses, that's a significant amount of capital that's tied up in that business model. And then having that uncertainty sort of down the line creates a little bit more unpredictability about the future opportunities of selling that product. And it also creates a potential glut in inventory and leads to higher markdowns and then higher operating costs and lower profit at the end of the day. So having those avenues to still achieve and explore that growth in a real capital light way by accessing product direct from the source or through distributors is a really compelling way, or a compelling strategy for retailers to grow. It's also a cash flow positive model of growth, because as Tom mentioned, you're actually taking the sale before you're paying for the product. Whereas in the pipeline model, you're actually paying for the product, getting it ready for sale, and then hoping it sells on site. So you're often you're buying the product and outlaying cash before you're actually selling it. This is sort of the reverse of that, where you're selling the product and then you're paying for it afterwards. So it's a cash flow positive revenue model, which is a nice change for a lot of retailers. And timing wise, the technology's never been better. So we look at technology like marketplaces, but then also a whole raft of supply chain technology from the sellers themselves. They've been gearing up heavily around making sure their D2C experiences are really tight, particularly over the last 2 years. They've invested a lot in technology, and it's never been better. It's still got a little way to go, particularly for some segments of the market, but it's actually never been better than right now. So all of those things aligning is playing really well for investing in this type of strategy and giving it a go. It's also relatively low risk, which I think is also attractive for a lot of kind of key businesses at scale right now with the uncertainty looking ahead. And that's super important. I also think that sellers these days are a lot more comfortable and a lot more aware of marketplace technology. I remember when at SurfStitch, a previous role of mine, we were first launching our marketplace strategy, and it was a lot more difficult to onboard sellers and get them comfortable with the idea of a marketplace model than it is today. It's a lot more commonplace today, and the onboarding process is a lot faster today than it might have been kind of 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, I echo that point. In my previous life, I spent a long time at eBay and certainly saw the maturity of sophistication of not just the sellers, but obviously now, as you mentioned, the technology available to support, more frictionless seller onboarding. Tom, can you maybe touch on, or I'd ask you to touch on, how you see the evolution? Obviously at one point in time there was Amazon and eBay to a lesser degree, but Amazon's kind of the only game in town. Are you seeing a bit of diversification or desire, or call it Amazon fatigue, or maybe there's just more options for sellers out there that are not just the one size fits all marketplace?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, there are hundreds of marketplaces, some counts nearing 1,000 different marketplaces, and many of them have different niches. And even a third of the Amazon sellers say that they're planning to move to other marketplaces. A lot of these businesses, the third-party sellers, can't survive just with all their business dependent upon Amazon. So it's very important that they diversify. Walmart's grown quite a bit. But again, a lot of niche marketplaces exist and have continued growing and capturing marketplace or market share from the traditional retailers or e-commerce businesses. In fact, depending on which analyst you listen to, the total amount of e-commerce that happens on marketplaces is somewhere between 67% and 73% and growing at a pretty fast clip. So that's not just the big giants. It's a lot of these small organizations that are leveraging the platform model to disrupt industries. I'm definitely seeing that quite a bit. And it's B2C and B2B, and there can be niches in many different regards, and lots of opportunity out there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think we are seeing that sort of growth enormously in all sorts of different niches, which I think sellers can perhaps, have a bit more of a synergy with the brand or the products that they represent with a particular brand. Obviously, Amazon's a strong brand, but it's not a specialty. So think of a specialty retailer that's got some very strong complementary adjacent categories supplied by sellers. Was certainly something we're seeing a lot of. So both of you, Justin and Tom, have got years of experience, working with retail brands that have added marketplaces to their e-commerce strategies. So perhaps before we just get into some advice about helping the audience how they scale their e-commerce with the marketplace, could we spend a few moments on trying to help them recognize the signals that a brand is ready for this? Now, the way I look at or try to describe this in my conversations is the value prop, I think, is very clear. I mean, most people, I'm sure the audience can see that the opportunity to sell a limitless amount of product in any category that you desire, that you believe you've got a right to do so, or your customer would purchase. But so whilst the upside is so high, you touched on perhaps having some resource requirements from the businesses that want to put this on board, Tom. This is not some small little email marketing tool that you're going to plug in and see a benefit. This is a business transformation, and you need to be ready to do that. And I kind of believe that the approach, you need to be all in. This can't be something that you play a few hands of and get the right result. This is an all-in strategy. So, perhaps, Tom, you can touch on maybe the signals or sort of markers that a retailer or a brand would believe they've got a right to start this, or they're ready for this strategy.
Sure. Lots of challenges that retailers, e-commerce organizations are facing. Obviously, one of the big ones is margin squeeze. In the last couple of years with the pandemic, supply chain challenges have resulted in a lot of out of stocks or not having the ability to fulfill customer orders. The need to expand categories, the ability to increase margin and collect a lot of data. With the third-party cookies somewhat disappearing, it's more important that organizations collect their own first-party data. And the one way of doing that is having more sellers, more products, more web traffic, better SEO on your own site from your own marketplace, which has a larger catalog and more of a magnet to the customers that you want to attract. Many different business reasons in which drive the transformation to a marketplace. The technology has also changed quite a bit, quite drastically as well. When we first started building these marketplaces about 15 years ago, there were sometimes 3-year projects, $10+ million. Now those years turn into months, and you can lop some zeros off the project costs. They get much faster, much lower cost, much more robust, more features, better integrations, better connectivity to the sellers. So the transformation of products like Marketplace that have made it so easy for businesses to not only transform their technology, but transform their business into a platform economy business, really have made the adoption of Marketplace almost a no-brainer in many cases.
Yeah, I agree. One of the sort of phrases that we talk about at Marketplace and when helping identify, businesses that are ready to adopt this strategy that we look to partner with is what advantage do you have, or kind of what's your unfair advantage in market, and it really boils down to a few different areas, but the biggest one from a retail perspective is the consumer base that you've already built. I mean, when you're building up a e-commerce business, it tends to be the most expensive and time-consuming process is attracting regular, recurring customers to your business, and so one of the easiest ways to look at is as a growth lever. Do I believe I have a right or an opportunity to sell more products? I think most merchandise or planning teams in retail businesses around the country would have on a whiteboard somewhere or a strategy deck or a sort of aspiration view of categories and products they think they could sell, and they know their customers would be interested in buying, but perhaps weren't willing to take the risk on the inventory. In a marketplace model, there's risk, there's reputational risk, but there's not that sort of harder barrier to entry, which is often stops people from going in there. Justin, I mean, you're in a very unique position. you were managing director of Surf Stitch, before they went down this path, and obviously, having successfully, you've left the business now, but having successfully been through the growth element. I'd love to sort of pick your brain a little bit on why you thought it was the right time for Surf Stitch to adopt the strategy, and sort of what were the signs that sort of led you there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Surf Stitch had definitely been through a journey. It was founded in 2008, so it was considered a relatively mature multi-brand e-commerce player in this space. So it did a great job early on of scaling quickly through adding more brands, adding more products in that typical linear model, and had a great focus on customer experience. So it really did the hard yards early, building that customer trust, building the customer database and customer loyalty. And it was quite well regarded, still is. So it had this kind of good trust with its existing cohort of customers, good loyalty, but it definitely started to plateau. So it had 400 brands sitting in that coastal lifestyle space, probably had all the best brands that were most desirable by that customer cohort. But there was a couple of challenges that were limiting the growth. One, it was pretty much at capacity in its fulfillment center. It had changed ownership over the years, so it went public and then it went back to private equity. So some of the commercial expectations had changed, and definitely the focus on profitability and cash flow management being in that private equity world. So our priorities had changed a little bit, but we still wanted to unlock future growth. So we wanted to grow our customer base. We wanted to increase our average order value, and we really wanted to grow our purchase frequency from our existing loyal customers. So one of our key initiatives was, how do we launch into some new parallel categories that are still within that coastal lifestyle realm, but not necessarily dedicated around surf in particular. So us making that transition from being a multi-branded surf retailer to a multi-branded coastal lifestyle platform was the key objective for us. And one way to unlock that was to launch a marketplace portion of the business and strategy to get into some new categories like outdoor, like activewear, wellness, because they're all things that our customers really valued highly and were purchasing from other retailers, but would also purchase from us because they had that inherent trust. They were browsing our platforms regularly anyway, and they had that trust there to transact on different categories with us. So, but we didn't necessarily have this huge war chest of capital in our new ownership structure, and our risk profile was significantly less than when we were a public company with and raising capital, etc. So this became a perfect opportunity for us to test those new strategies.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. The trust bit really resonates with me in that, we talk about building a community of customers, in your traditional retail model. So when you add third-party products and categories that are sort of sitting under that Surf Stitch banner, it has it conveys a different message than if it's something somebody's shopping on one of those mega marketplaces, be it Etsy or eBay or even Amazon, where that kind of that visibility of the seller, and you're buying it from a third party, you just happen to be on that sort of destination. I think it's a very different mindset for the customer. There's that expectation that you've vetted the product, which is absolutely what happens, of course. So I think that, the advantage that retail businesses have that have got that loyal customer base is that, that the customers are going to trust that the products up there are the right product and the right price. And I think Surf Stitch is such a great example of that.
For sure. And we kept our model very much integrated. So we opted to not have a completely separate marketplace, to have a separate destination for customers to shop that. So we really weaved in our assortment with our own product and with marketplace products. So just to really build that trust as well with the customer. So as an example, we had some of our main suppliers were wholesale customers, but also marketplace customers. So we would invest in their product that we were super confident would get good sell-through, and we had good margins and didn't have any markdown liability. But we might get the rest of their range and put that on a marketplace style model But it would sit next to each other within the product galleries, and customers could purchase both a marketplace and a traditional wholesale product in the one order from the same seller, and have that be kind of sent to them in two different parcels. So that was a good way for Surf Stitch to unlock additional growth, test new products, get that extended range, really significantly grow the assortment, without necessarily investing in the inventory, investing in the supply chain, getting a new warehouse, like taking some really big capital risks and leaps that our new owners weren't necessarily comfortable with.
If I can add on to that, I think there are two ways of doing this, two ways of looking at it. You can play offense and play defense at the same time. So with that cart, let's say you have 4 items that are your first party goods and you want to add a 5th product to the cart. That can be a great cross sell from a third party seller. So you're adding that incremental dollar value and additional item to your AOV, to your cart for the customer. That's the offensive side of trying to add additional revenue. But there's also, you have to think about the defensive side. If somebody comes to your site and needs to buy 5 products for this trip they're taking, or whatever reason they're looking for 5, and you only have 4 of them, you may be able to sell them 4, but they may abandon the entire cart and go over to Amazon or some other site that may have all 5. And you not only lose that 1/5 additional product, but you lose all 4 that were going to be in your cart. So having that broader catalog selection helps add more to cart and avoid losing a full cart.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Richard. We did a lot of analysis around that, and particularly given our traditional modeling of being multi-branded, we had kind of 400 brands at one point. So you're carrying a really wide assortment, but not a very deep assortment. So your sizing can get fragmented quite early within the season, because you just don't have the capital to invest very deep across all the styles that you're purchasing. We had 20,000 SKUs at one point there of our own inventory that we carried in a warehouse. So having that ability to convert a customer when you might have been broken on a particular size, you're just tapping into so much more depth if you're kind of hitting the distributor's warehouse pools or the manufacturer's warehouse pools. You've got significantly more depth at your disposal. So it's definitely a conversion lever, and solves one of those biggest challenges around broken sizes in key styles, and was particularly relevant through COVID when we had no idea we were going to get spikes in sales like we did, and us having the marketplace model there, we got broken really early on some of our owned inventory, but being able to access the depth from suppliers' warehouses really elongated our growth potential through peak COVID. Eventually our suppliers got broken as well, because it kind of happened everywhere. But those of our competitors that didn't have that marketplace opportunity didn't get that elongation of growth through COVID like we were able to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a value opportunity or the value proposition of this, and also summarizing the kind of the signs when it's right for you. I mean, if I kind of try and summarize it down, it's businesses that recognize they have an advantage or a right to do this for all of those reasons that you guys have stated. I think, the benefits are quite clear. Ultimately, it's about increasing the lifetime value of the existing customer base by having a larger assortment of product and categories to sell. Talking to a cart abandonment and some of the points that Tom just made then around, ultimately having extra categories and products to sell is like fishing with a bigger net. You're actually able to acquire more customers, and your brand and products will index in search more if you have more products. The other one that we haven't touched on, which I think is an interesting one for certain businesses, is particularly specialty retailers that sell high-priced goods that maybe have a very loyal customer base but don't have a very frequent customer base. So adding products in a category that you're going to have a chance to interact and transact with on a more higher frequency, it can only be a benefit to those retailers adopting the strategy. So we've sort of come to the point where we want to talk about the best practices. So, you've both been so close to it, and you've noticed throughout your time helping companies build marketplaces, and obviously experiencing it, obviously building it yourself, Justin. And perhaps I'll start with you, Justin. what's one of the things that you've really seen successful marketplace, or what was successful for you, I suppose, not about what you've observed doing. I think what is the most obvious one about, that you learn, and maybe, if you're willing to share, maybe there was some mistakes made or some missteps, but ultimately what do you think are the key strategies that made this a successful operation for Surf Stitch?
Yeah, for sure. I think I touched on a couple earlier. So Surf Stitch already had a reasonably mature and solid-sized engaged audience. So it really tapped into that coastal lifestyle market, spoke to that consumer well, had really relevant content on the platform, and already had that relevant brand portfolio on the content on the platform. So it was already doing one of the hardest jobs is resonating with its customers and having that open dialogue with its customers. And I think that's an important sort of first step. Knowing what you're good at and being really good at what you should be good at is important. So the other piece was trying to find the right technology partner for the business to easily capitalize on the opportunity of kind of exploring new categories, transitioning from its linear e-com model into more of a platform model. So that was really important as well. So Surf Stitch being capital light and wanting to maintain and accelerate profitability, needed to find a very capital light way to scale, and keeping its tech stack light and lean was an important element of that. So we tried to develop a marketplace integration with our first marketplace seller initially, and we did that in-house. It took us quite a while, maybe 6 months to sort of build it, but then there was a lot of band-aids and plugging of information and learning along the way. So we never really felt like we had got it right. We added more headcount, added more costs, added more complexity to our existing model, and we weren't really able to aggressively scale it. We quickly realized that if we were to run through that process for every single seller that we were looking to onboard, and we were talking about hundreds of sellers, we would have to significantly invest in team, and we would have to significantly invest in our kind of technology structure. And that's from a documentation standpoint and rigor and testing and innovation within that tech space. So we had to have a hard look at ourselves and go, are we a technology company, or are we a retailer sort of selling goods, or a platform? And it was an easy conversation as new pieces of tech were coming to the market around the same time, Marketplacer being one of them. So we went to market. We saw that there were some tech partners that could do a lot of what we were trying to do virtually out of the box. There was some customization that we had to do, but finding a partner that was very flexible around our operating model was crucial for that. And we opted to go with Marketplacer. And we still kept our kind of homegrown tech in the background with one of our existing partners that we had. So we had that kind of operating there. Marketplacer was really flexible to run alongside that and really rapidly help us onboard significant additional products in a very short space of time. So the onboarding was good. It worked really well with our Salesforce tech stack at the time. So plugged into that, helped us rapidly onboard new brands. And I think within the first 12 months, we had well over 10,000 new products that were added to site, with no real additional kind of tech headcount internally that we needed to add. So it was definitely a solution that worked well for us. When talking about some of the things that we learnt along the way, the type of team capability that you need in-house, and I think Tom mentioned this earlier, we probably underestimated that seller onboarding piece and the seller relationship management piece. I think there's a very different dynamic when you're a multi-branded e-com, buying products through purchase orders and then owning those products, and then you're being responsible for selling those products. It's a very different capability that you need internally when you're the brand writing the checks and paying for the product up front before having to sell it, then really sort of working and nurturing with your seller community to get them incentivized to sell it on your platform. So we had to change our team structure, and our early team structure was quite different to where we ended up. So having that sort of real seller focus team was important to getting that accelerated sell through. So we had a seller onboarding team, and then we had a kind of trade team that worked around really nurturing those sellers once they were on site. And that's making sure they were up to date with our promotional plans, with all of our trade plans. We gave them opportunities to promote their products across our different marketing channels. And that proved to be an additional revenue stream for us as well. So we were able to sell those marketing opportunities to our really motivated sellers. So we could sell email space, we could sell on-site real estate, we could sell priority placement in the gallery in certain categories at certain times of year. So that actually created a nice new incremental revenue stream that was quite profitable for us as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that insight, Justin. I mean, one of the areas that certainly I know the Marketplace team was very proud of working with you guys was that speed to market. I mean, a circa 6-week project timeline from start to finish was certainly very quick, and you obviously had some established operations, but I think, to sort of shed some light on a sort of a typical time frame for the audience. Tom, I'd love to hear from you on what you think or what you've seen make, the key sort of markers for a successful strategy in this space.
Certainly, and 6 weeks to launch definitely is fast. As I mentioned, back in the custom build days, these were 3-year projects building a marketplace, and marketplaces really accelerated that time to market. So in the evolution and the strategy of becoming a platform business by launching a marketplace, we typically reference the marketplace maturity model. Let me talk through those 5 stages, which is fairly similar to the CMM, CMMI capability maturity model, if you're familiar with the software development methodology. The first level is, or tier is, e-commerce, which is first-party goods, traditional retail, been around, as I mentioned, for millennia, or e-commerce for a quarter century. You have to go through that pipeline of activities, the 9 or 10 steps we looked at in the pipeline diagram. So it's labor-intensive, it's slow, but it works. The next step in that maturity is dropship, which we talked about. And a lot of people ask, what's the difference between dropship and marketplace? And level 2 and level 3 kind of explain that difference. So dropship, of those, I think it was 9 activities in the pipeline model we showed, you're only outsourcing one of them. That's the fulfillment. So the dropshipper will do the fulfillment for you. They hold and they fulfill, actually. So two out of 9 activities are done by the dropshipper. But you, as a dropship organization, you still have to source the goods. You still have to negotiate custom contracts with each vendor. You still have to load it into your ERP. You still have to merchandise each product. You still have to set the price for it. You have to do all those other activities, which are labor intensive and capital intensive. Sometimes you don't have to hold it financially sometimes, but still, it's not a true pipeline. It's not a true platform business. Once you get to level 3 of the maturity model, that's where we showed outsourcing 8 of those 9 activities. You're still processing the orders, but again, that's an automated activity. So you really get the scalability, you get the exponential growth of scale, you get a much more nimble, faster time to market, more larger SKU count opportunity once you're in level 3 in becoming a true platform business. Level 4, as Justin alluded to, once you start scaling beyond a handful of sellers, you start having to manage dozens or hundreds or sometimes thousands of sellers. You really need automated tools that can do that for you. And that's where the marketplace platform really excels, and starting to manage them in a quantitative manner. So level 4 is quantitative management in the marketplace maturity model, much like in CMMI. And the numbers are driving what happens. So if a seller starts being late on their shipping times, or late in responding to customer queries, or dropping below 3.5 stars, you suspend them automatically, really letting the data drive the business. And level 5 of marketplace maturity model is optimizing, again, like CMM, CMMI. And that's where you innovate with new business models. So that could be adding a services marketplace to a product marketplace, offering live streaming, new innovations that we see. A lot of times we see Amazon and Alibaba and these other big marketplace operators innovating and bringing. Once you have that momentum of the flywheel turning, you can really innovate the business and transform quite a bit.
Yeah, that's excellent, Tom. I think, you've obviously been privileged enough to see the build and growth of a lot of those marketplaces. And I think some of the points you make that I suppose resonate with me the most are around that, and you too, Justin, the removal of the friction for sellers, like making this easy. I mean, this has traditionally not been external sales channels, as we touched on, has been typically something pretty hard. I mean, there's whole industries that have been spun up to help sellers get to third-party marketplaces. And not that those are redundant, but I think it's catering for all levels of sophistication. So certainly it's an area that Marketplacer is focused on, as you spoke about, Tom, the sort of suite of plugins or connectors into those common platforms. But, other areas such as event-based architecture, when we're looking at hundreds or potentially many hundreds of sellers on a platform, removing or adding automation and removing the ability for things like inventory and price updates to be flowing through in an automated fashion. So it's and now certainly Marketplaces develop that through our GraphQL API layer. I think, while we're talking about, we're lucky to have Justin here, who's actually been on that journey. So whilst we've probably got a few moments left, I wanted to perhaps talk about some successful marketplace launches, and Justin, I know you've talked a bit about SoapStitch, but I think there might be a chance for you to share a little bit more about how we kind of put all the elements of what we discussed here today to help the audience kind of scale an e-commerce presence with a marketplace. Is there anything else that you'd like to sort of share around, perhaps the SurfStitch journey? I mean, we've sort of dived right into the detail, but perhaps if you want to sort of bring it up a little level and just make sure that everyone is comfortable with who the SurfStitch business actually is and sort of, and the rest of that journey. And then I'll sort of throw to Tom about maybe an example that he can give about a successful marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the transition from being a multi-branded traditional e-com business to being a more broad focused coastal lifestyle platform was the big transition for us that we had to make. So that was the key piece as a business that we had to unlock, and we had to unlock it in what was a pretty capital light way on a fairly short timeline, because we had a new ownership structure that was really trying to unlock additional profitability and really realize the potential of what was a fast-growing digital ecosystem.
So, Justin,
sorry,
it was
the little fella in the background.
That's okay. You were in the familiar territory of having a new owner that wants to grow the business without spending any money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Easy task, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, not difficult at all. So yeah, that was the big piece for us. Plus, I mean, to put it in context as well, we were dealing with, I guess, premium fashion brands that were also wanting to control, for want of a better word, the digital ecosystem. They wanted to control their brand more in that digital space. They wanted to control pricing, promotional activity, competition, their distribution channels. So there was a big kind of macro transition that was happening at the same time. So we were working with kind of global fashion brands at the same time. So guys like Patagonia, North Face, Nike, Billabong, Quicksilver, Vans, like those brands that also had their digital strategy that was around growing their own direct-to-consumer channels, but also protecting what their brand looked like in a lot of digital retail spaces. So having a marketplace opportunity for them was really important to give them additional control around pricing and promotional activity and assortment and channels to market. So it did all tie in well because we could allow those brands to have a lot more control of what their product looked like on the SurfStitch platform, a lot more control around pricing, a lot more control around not being out of stock and what they presented on site, while still giving it access to our customers at the same time. So it made some of our suppliers a lot more comfortable to grow with Surf Stitch when they had that additional elements of control. So that was another kind of key element that we were able to tick off. And it also allowed us to attract some brands because it had that element as well.
No, I think it's really interesting. And something that I always noticed with the Surf Stitch, as a consumer and looking at the site, and when you had, as you said, close to 10,000 products across your third-party marketplace, was how you presented it to the customer. It was quite a discreet way of presenting the third-party product to the customer. You touched on trust before. This wasn't Surf Stitch, putting up flashing lights saying we are now a marketplace. It was simply about extending the range that you had available to the customer. And yes, messaging to them that it may be shipped separately or it may be shipped in a different time frame, but it was just like another product. And I'm a customer. I mean, at the end of the day, what do I care where it comes from? What part of the country or what warehouse? I just want the product because I want to shop with Surf Stitch. And the other story that I love always hearing you talk about is when you think about this strategy as a retailer, you probably instantly think of new categories that are totally removed from what you do. And hey, there's a brand new incremental growth here. It's not going to cannibalize what I do. But Surf Stitch, one of the largest coastal lifestyle retail businesses getting around, you had dabbled with it before, but you never really sold surfboards, which I always found, which I didn't know. I didn't realize this. It was apparel and soft goods was the focus, but it makes sense. Surfboards, there's 1,000 shapes and sizes and brands, and they're difficult to do. And certainly this model allowed you to put up a pretty significant range in that space, which I had just assumed you had that product already in a big way, but it wasn't the case, was it?
No, definitely not. And selling surfboards online is very difficult because it actually product ages over time. Like fiberglass and boards go yellow even if they're out of the sun, just under light. So just being in the air ages boards. So if you were to try and plan and predict every individual person's shape and then try and carry that stock and then getting it to the customer logistically is quite challenging. So we weren't experts in shipping, holding, and planning for large, bulky goods that had a shelf life. And they also had low margin. So we were talking about apparel that operates in the high 50s from a gross margin perspective to surfboards, which is in the low 20s from a gross margin perspective. And they're expensive. They're $1,000 plus boards that might have a 2 to 3 month shelf life. And it's fragile, expensive to ship with a low margin. So it was a very tricky business to get right. So we actually started selling surfboards in the early days, but quickly reversed that and focused on higher margin, easier e-com friendly categories for us to distribute. But yeah, you're right. That kind of maturity of first moving to drop shipping surfboards direct from manufacturers, because that's what they did. They housed boards, they produced boards, they carried inventory, but they weren't going direct to consumer at the time. So we sort of started off with drop shipping, and then eventually we migrated to that marketplace model, which just significantly simplified that process. So particularly through COVID, when surfing exploded everywhere because you can't catch COVID in the surf. It's not a team sport. You're not high-fiving or tackling one another. You're sort of out in the outdoors and in nature. So it became really popular. People were surfing more. They were buying more boards. They were buying more equipment. So us being able to tap into that board and hardware part of our market, which is very much what our customers do every day, without having to invest in that kind of very capital-heavy inventory, was really important for us. But yeah, we were able to significantly expand our assortment there, and not just in traditional short boards. We had long boards, soft boards, beginner boards, stand-up paddle boards, all kinds of kind of surf craft that we were able to tap into through that marketplace model.
Yeah, it's an example of a great benefit that you're able to leverage with a marketplace strategy. Well, Tom, I mean, you've seen plenty. I'd love to hear, what's one of your favorite marketplace success stories you've been able to observe?
The FishBrain is a great example of a unique go-to-market business model that leveraged the platform economy marketplace concept. So FishBrain had a great community of people who love to fish, as the name kind of implies, mostly focused on the mobile based interface with smartphones, with 13 million anglers across the globe, but very hard to monetize that in terms of transactions, making they're not going to launch their own fulfillment center, distribution center, and manage all that, buy their own shipping setups. So what they did is they launched a marketplace with Marketplacer, enabling third-party sellers to tie in products, fishing-related products that tie into the content that's already there, into the already existing 13 million user community of the FishBrain app. Another thing that's really interesting about this is the headless architecture applied here. Instead of going to acquire a third-party e-commerce platform, they tied it into their existing mobile app. So Marketplacer enables a headless option to leverage the, again, really modern architecture of GraphQL, event-driven, webhook-based architecture of Marketplacer to tie it in without needing to get an e-commerce engine. You use it in the mobile app, FishBrain, to curate. And they quickly curated 30,000 products from over 100 different sellers that their products are interested in. And they have that intelligence of what the customers or the community users are interested in, and can personalize and inject the appropriate product based on what that viewer of content is looking at. So a great combination of leveraging community to drive commerce without having to buy a commerce engine or actually physically buy product.
I agree with you, Tom. We're particularly proud to have partnered with FishBrain in their approach. And we've talked a lot about retailers today, businesses that already do e-commerce, and this is just a great case of what essentially was a media company. I mean, it's Facebook for fishermen, really, where they had traditional advertisers on the platform, and they would monetize their user base by display ads and run an affiliate model where the people are clicking out. So to be able to turn those advertisers into sellers and keep their customers in their ecosystem to make their revenue model without having to bounce out was a game changer for them. And it's certainly improves conversion. It's such a better model where they get to and then enrich the data of the customer. They get to absolutely learn where it is these customers live, the products they're buying, the detail of that. So it's been a really exciting one to witness along the way. So I think that's probably time for everybody. So I wanted to thank Tom and Justin. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and stories. It's really fascinating to hear and with the insight that you've got. I hope everyone in the audience out there is excited to adopt a marketplace strategy and take that sort of platform approach for your brands to create a community, grow without the traditional limitations of retail. We'd certainly welcome any inquiries into both McFadden and Marketplacer if you'd love to understand more. But I want to thank everybody for their time, and thank you, Tom. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And Richard, a thank you to you for driving that conversation. That was great.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I think we can squeeze in a couple questions from the audience that have been coming in. Tom, I'm going to send this first question to you. What are the biggest misconceptions businesses have about operating in a marketplace?
One common misconception or mythbuster is that it's winner take all. There can be only one. So Walmart has a marketplace, therefore nobody else can have a marketplace. That's absolutely not true. There are hundreds of niche or specialty or community marketplaces that are extremely successful. Some may say, well, Amazon and Walmart sell apparel, so no chance for anybody else to sell apparel in a marketplace. SurfStitch is a great example that they can launch the marketplace and grow even greater their apparel commerce transaction volume with the marketplace business model. Two other examples in the apparel space would be, well, there are lots of places that sell sneakers. What's the need for a marketplace for sneakers? Well, StockX and Goat are two unicorn companies that both started about 7 years ago with marketplaces selling sneakers, and both of them have valuations, I think, in the $2 to $4 billion range. The $4 billion companies selling sneakers. Essentially, they authenticate, those $2,000 Air Jordans that you want to buy. And both of these companies started selling specialty apparel with the marketplace business model and grew to multi-billion-dollar valuations. So it is not winner take all. It's many winners can leverage the marketplace model.
Great, thanks. Justin, this question is targeted right to you. What was the biggest challenge that Surf Stitch faced when deciding to go to the marketplace route?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a couple of those points throughout the presentation. I think the biggest challenge for us was how do we unlock additional scale in a capital light way without loading heaps of headcount and technical complexity. So we're trying to unlock that challenge at the time. So once we had decided the marketplace road was our most obvious option to unlock that growth in a capital light way, we had to figure out how does that impact our business model, how does it impact our team, and then how do we drive that sort of change management from the leadership team down through all departments, right from merchandising to marketing, across to tech and customer service and fulfillment logistics. So actually doing that change management piece was probably the most complex part. And there was a few learnings along the way where we had to adjust strategy, adjust our team shape, adjust our priorities, and adjust our kind of performance metrics and expectations along the way. And what really helped us was kind of that what do they call it? I can't think of it now. The not perfection, but kind of progress over perfection. That's what I'm trying to say. So we just had to start on the journey, make progress, move down the path, and not trying to get it absolutely perfect from day one. Otherwise, we probably would have never launched. So that progress over perfection model for us really worked. And I think for a lot of retailers as well, their interpretation of a marketplace will be different depending on their starting point. So I think that's important. And the barriers to launch a marketplace are so much lower now. You can do it in a pretty capital light way with lightweight technology and very little upfront investment to get live and get going and to learn along the way. So that'd be my element of advice, but also one of our more significant challenges was actually to transition our business model into more of a platform with a marketplace element.
Awesome, thank you. And that's all the time we have for today. So along with a big thank you to Richard, Tom, and Justin, we also wanted to thank you, our audience, for joining in today's conversation. Now, as a reminder, today's webinar will be available on demand, and you will receive an email with a link for continued access. And if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. You will get an answer via email later on. And everyone have a great day.